Okay, I'm gonna try to put out my argument for random events existing in the universe. First, a quick explanation on I am a determinist and how random events can occur in a deterministic timeline. The deterministic timeline doesn't depend on causality. The way it's commonly viewed, that way does depend on causality. But the idea of determinism itself, and that whatever's going to happen tomorrow is going to happen tomorrow, and it can't happen any other way, that doesn't depend on whatever's happening tomorrow, depending on whatever happens today. And so causality and determinism aren't necessarily linked. The problem that I have with causality is that it is induction by enumeration, or reasons to depend on it. Hume wrote a lot on how the causality, there's no reason to think that any cause leads to any specific effect. And so it could be the case that there are uncaused causes, and I would argue that it's more likely the case that there are uncaused causes than that it's not the case. The common argument for causality is induction by enumeration. It's always been this way. Everything we've seen has seemed to be caused. Everything that appears to be random has turned out to be caused, and so things are probably causal. And my problem is that probably shouldn't equate to the word law. So the reason that I think that causality isn't 100% is it seems more likely to me. In my last video that this is going to be a response to, I talked a little bit about how random events explain the beginning of the universe, and that it doesn't require the universe to be a single object which just comes out of nowhere, but is simply built out of small objects, or more dense objects, and smooths out into smaller objects by events causing that object to move differently and interacting with itself in different ways. And so in the beginning of the universe there was an infinitely dense ball of matter. It wasn't moving because there was no other object for it to be compared to, and so time didn't exist. So a single random event occurs which splits that ball into two. The two start moving and they can be compared to each other, and so time begins. That ball keeps splitting down further and further, and the Big Bang happens. As there's more movement occurring, time moves quicker from our point of view, slower from the object's point of view. And so it seems to be an explosion outwards, but from the object's point of view, it would probably just be the same way that you or I experience time. Everything would be happening slowly, but it would seem to be going slower and slower as it bounces into more things. So that explains the beginning of the universe. And to counter the argument that causality is true because we've never seen it not be true, if we take that argument further to the present day and look at how many objects there are and how small these objects are when broken down into their smallest pieces, if this is the way that random events occur, in that it's breaking apart objects that previously couldn't be broken apart, so objects which can't be broken down into smaller objects, a random event occurs which makes part of that object move differently, and so it breaks itself down into a smaller object. So the reason that we haven't been able to observe these things is that it happens on such a small scale that we don't really notice them. So, I mean, we don't even have the ability to observe the smallest objects in existence today. So how can we say that something can't happen to those objects which we that something can't happen to those objects because we've never observed it to happen, when we can't even observe the objects in the first place. So that being said, the sample size that we have for observing causal chains is such a small sample size. It is only probably a few thousand years since we've been cognitively able to observe causal events and make these links, and that compared to the entire time span that the universe has existed is extremely small. So even if these things aren't happening at such a small scale, they could be happening so far away that we would never see them, in both so far away in time and space that we could never see them. So it explains the beginning of the universe. It explains why quantum mechanics is so random. By the time the random events are occurring at a smaller scale, the quantum events could simply be so mechanical that we can actually figure them out. So when Aristotle first theorized the atom, it could be possible that he was right. It was just a ball in space. I don't think that's true, but if that happened trillions of years ago and then kept breaking down further and further into the photons that we have now, the reason that we can never find the smallest object could be because we can never see the smallest object. The smallest object keeps getting broken down into a smaller object. So aside from simply explaining the existence of the universe, it also explains things like inorganic matter and organic matter. We haven't been able to figure out why there's a difference between the two, but one lives and the other doesn't. But if it could just simply be different parts of the universe getting broken down in different ways, and so as things moved differently, it could have become an organic cell, which spread out and became life. So if a change in a random event occurs, if it occurs in the past of time, it could cause the present. I went over that in my previous video, so I'm going to skip that part. But well, why I believe that it's the present specifically instead of something that simply could be called the present. A reason for that to be called the present would be that non-moving objects in space are dormant. They don't exist because they don't exist in time, but they still have some sort of existence, like the original ball of matter. It didn't exist in the universe that we're aware of because it didn't exist in time, and time didn't exist because there hadn't been any movement on it yet. And so in the same way that non-moving objects become active when they start moving, then so too do timelines become active when they change. And so if there's a single timeline, then there would be no present because nothing on it is different than any other moment. But if there is a change somewhere, then that could bring the present into existence, essentially. And so that's why a random event is likely to be the present. That explains why we experience the present. We're simply playing out an event that occurred and changing the future into the past.